wanted to introduce Raj Patel, who's going to bring Rupa on stage. I've known Raj for 10 or 15 years or so. Has an incredible wit and is irrepressible. He is perhaps one of the most insightful people I know on the relationship between capitalism, ecology, and the food system. We're thrilled that he's able to be with us today, even briefly. So, Raj, why don't you come on?
Thanks very much, Andy, and thank you all for being here. It's such an honor to introduce Dr. Rupa Marya. Now, my friendship with Rupa began, as the best ones do, at a protest rally. We were protesting Monsanto. I believe I was dressed as a genetically modified tomato, that's how you pronounce it, and Rupa was playing with her band, Rupa and the April Fishes. Now, if you haven't heard of the band, you are in an increasing minority. Rupa and the April Fishes have played dozens of countries, massive festivals around the world. And I mean, I remember there was a Manu Chao concert in San Francisco at the Fillmore, and Rupa was the opening act, and she had everyone dancing on their seats. And then Manu Chao comes on, and then after a couple of songs, everyone kind of just leaves because they realize that it doesn't get better than the kinds of energy that Rupa is able to bring to the world through her music. But Rupa is not just an acclaimed musician. She is also an associate professor of medicine at the University of California, San Francisco. If you're ever unfortunate enough to fall ill in the Bay Area, it may be your fortune to fall under her care. She's a rare thing in the world of medicine. She's a physician who listens and whose acts of diagnosis are collaborative and transformative. As part of her work at the University of California, San Francisco, Rupa is the faculty director of the Do No Harm Coalition, a medical scientific investigation into the health effects of police violence, particularly as that violence is written into Black, Indigenous, and peoples of colors communities. She was also one of the first medics, or one of the medics at the Standing Rock protest, helping waterkeepers and defenders of planet Earth survive the onslaughts of the militias there. And it is not surprising that Rupa was part of the Standing Rock protest. She brings her activist self to all parts of her life, just as she brings her deep medicine to all parts of the activist world. Now, Rupa is also, and she's asking me to use this language for all the complex meaning that it contains, a farmer's wife. So to explain that, it's my great honor to introduce the co-founder of Top Leap Farms to be with us for the final keynote presentation this morning at EcoFarm 2021, Dr. Rupa Marya, who will lead us in a discussion of a presentation, Farming is Medicine. Rupa, take it away.
Thank you, Raj, for that glorious introduction. And thank you, everybody. I'm going to imagine that I'm at the podium in a Sillamar as opposed to in my slippers here in my studio. But I'm so happy to be here. So let's get started. Today, we're going to talk about farming as medicine. I want to start by acknowledging my own ancestors and the ancestors of this land where I'm speaking to you from. My ancestors come from Punjab, India. They were warriors, farmers, healers, scientists, and artists. I was born in Ramaytush land, where I work as a doctor at UCSF, and I'm speaking to you today from the unceded Ohlone territory of Huichin, now called Oakland, California, where I live on a small urban farm with land brought together through our neighbors taking down fences. I am grateful to my ancestors for all the gifts they continually bring to my life, and to the ancestors of this land for keeping me safe in this place where I grew up, and this place where I raised my children. I'm grateful to the Ohlone people who I have met and who have become my friends, who have guided my own unlearning and continue to help me situate my work in the most healing alignment. And I am grateful to my husband, Benjamin Farr, a farmer, for bringing the magic of soil and seeds into my life. I dedicate my talk today to the radical memory of Amigo Bob, whose passion and presence in our lives continue to impact us in this work. I say radical because it points to the roots, from the Latin radix. Amigo Bob inspired us to think about the roots, to care for the roots, and to speak from that place of relationship. What we have bared witness to in this past year alone is showing us a system frayed at its edges and a system of dysfunction. It is a system that requires desperation, our desperation. Our vulnerabilities and our violence have been exposed in ways that are irrefutable. The lines of power drawn sharply across the bodies of Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities have come into sharp focus. From police violence to wildfire smoke to lungs inflamed with COVID, the resounding chorus of this time is "I can't breathe." COVID has shown us the unimaginable cruelty that is required for this society to run. It is showing a society obsessed with growth, where time, money, and energy are not allocated to center care. It is showing us what happens when we leave people behind, when we pretend that we are separate from the web of life and from each other. It is showing us that when we center profit over safety, health, and well-being, ultimately, we will all fail. We have watched as the ugliness of this nation revealed itself again, hardly a surprise to those of us who contend with it every day. We have buried our elders, who took with them their stories, their languages, and their wisdom. We have shouldered the brunt of these multiple pandemics. As we sit together now with almost 500,000 people dead in the US alone, it is time for us to reimagine what the future can be, and to look unflinchingly at what life around us is saying, and to create another way forward. What has become abundantly clear is that we can no longer pretend to look at systems in isolation and hope to make things better. We cannot talk about soil health without also contending with the legacies of genocide of Indigenous people and the destruction of the ecosystems they tended. We cannot talk about farming without talking about stolen labor and why so many Black and Brown people have been denied land ownership or had it taken from them, as in the case of Japanese farmers here in California. We cannot talk about agriculture without talking about our own health and the health of the planet. Everything is inextricably tangled up in a web of relations. Today, I speak to you from the culmination of my life experience as a hospital medicine doctor, who has been on the front lines of healthcare for the past 19 years at UCSF, as a musician who has traveled around the world to examine the impact of social forces on health, as a mother, and as a farmer's wife, and as someone who loves a good story. And I have a story to share with you. It is my story. It is the story of how a doctor started to notice health problems and their connection to the living systems that were dysregulated around her. It is the story of investigating health deeply, down to the very fibers of our social fabric and the cosmologies that we have not chosen, that we are forced to operate under. It is the story of a doctor who married a farmer and started reading his soil microbiology reports, noting how similar they were to the ones she was seeing from the stool cultures of her patients with inflammatory bowel disease. She started to make the connection that the earth was a body like her own, and the soil was the gut, the place where nutrient cycling occurred and immunity was supported. This is the story of a doctor who has decided to become a farmer, and how this move was guided by patients and their stories. Taking care of people when they are sick has been one of my life's greatest privileges. If you listen carefully, people will often tell you why they got sick. Their stories have propelled my own investigation into why we are all getting sick in the ways that we are. Like the story of Lorenzo, whose name, like other patients mentioned here today, has been changed to protect his privacy. He was 36 years old when he was admitted to UCSF. He grew up as the child of Mexican immigrants and worked as a groundskeeper at a school in the Central Valley, putting Roundup on the grounds to control the weeds. An avid athlete, Lorenzo developed a gnawing back pain and knew that something was wrong. After several scans and tests, he was diagnosed with the most aggressive form of colon cancer I had ever seen. The last week of his life, I was working to match blood transfusions with the quickening pace of bleeding from his tumor. Eventually, we couldn't keep up, and the cancer took his life, only 4 months after diagnosis. Colon cancer is becoming much more prevalent in younger and younger people, and is now the leading cause of cancer death in people under 50. As with all diseases in a racist society, mortality disproportionately impacts Black and Indigenous people. Changes in the gut microbiome are contributing to this trend, as are multiple exposures. Then there's the story of Sarah, who was 50 years old and admitted with a severe gastroenteritis caused by the dreaded bacteria Clostridium difficile. This organism is the most common healthcare-associated infection in the US and causes a life-threatening diarrhea. We usually see it when someone has had a round of antibiotic where their normal gut flora die and leave space for a pathogen like C. diff to proliferate. We also see it in people who are hospitalized repeatedly or who live in a nursing home. What was striking about Sarah's case is that she had no antibiotic use and no prior hospitalization. She got C. diff in the community. And since the mid-2000s, we started noticing more cases of community-acquired C. diff. This bacteria is ubiquitous. It lives in the soil and in the guts of other animals. I remembered that Clostridium difficile is one of those organisms that remain in the soil after it is treated with glyphosate. I started to wonder if we were cultivating these organisms in our soil with our farming practices. Was the way we were treating our livestock making C. diff more prevalent? In fact, a few studies have confirmed that living close to a farm is a risk factor of getting C. diff out in the community. Overuse of antibiotics in livestock is leading to high levels of animal manure that eventually end up in dust in our homes if we live near a farm or in our food. We must also investigate if the use of pesticides, such as glyphosate, is concentrating their levels in the soil. Our health is being impacted by our land use and our farming practices here in California and around the world. And our health is being impacted in a very patterned way. All of the most prevalent diseases in cultures that employ modern industrial farming techniques are diseases where inflammation plays a critical role. Even with COVID, whether you live or die is dependent on how inflamed you become. This inflammation is occurring in response to the world around us. It is not something an individual can change by making different lifestyle or shopping choices. An organic produce section or farmer's market won't make this better. This is how the human body has evolved to respond to the structures around us. But this isn't simply about farming. It is about a mindset that leads to farming in a certain way. It is about a society structured through that mindset that values extraction over every other thing. Extraction of resources, extraction of food, extraction of labor. And we can trace the origins of that mindset back to a time and place. And what I noticed is that a similar mindset developed in medicine around the same time and the same place. While farming and medicine both have roots that stretch back thousands of years, the version we are practicing at large today have common recent roots, dating back around 600 years ago, with the birth of capitalism and the colonial structures that were necessary to offer up stolen land and stolen labor to make capitalism work. Farming and medicine were both parts of the colonizing of these lands, which involved destroying traditional relationships between people and their ecologies and replacing them with extractive ones that served colonial ends. In today's universities, farming and medicine are both taught through an ahistorical lens, which hides the legacies of land theft, genocide, and labor theft that their industries required to exist in these territories. The training is science-based, but selectively so, focusing on science that advances its agendas rather than interrogating its assumptions of power. Both farming and medicine had their education and policy shaped by philanthrocapitalists, people who stood to gain by donating huge sums to alter the ways in which we learn and practice. In medicine, the Rockefellers and Carnegies were obsessed with the potential for fossil fuels to generate pharmaceuticals. They supported the work of Abraham Flexner, who wrote a damning report in 1910 that led to shutting down of many schools of medicine in the US, including most Black medical colleges. Around the turn of the 20th century, medicine here was eclectic, with different traditions all equal in the same marketplace. Flexner's report ensured that any medical colleges that taught herbalism or acupuncture were shut down, forcing all education and licensing to follow a particular science-based path. I spent hours learning biochemistry that I have never applied in the care of patients. Farming also received this special treatment, with the Rockefellers investing heavily in the Green Revolution that would forever alter, or not forever, but for now, alter the face of the earth with vast amounts of petrochemical inputs in our food system. This problem continues today as Bill Gates is now the largest owner of farmland on planet Earth. The result, which is planned and manufactured, is our industries have a lot of fossil fuel-based inputs. If you're getting the Pfizer or Moderna COVID vaccine, it contains some polyethylene glycol, a food-safe antifreeze derived from petroleum. When you take a dose of Miralax, you're addressing constipation with the same substance. For farmers, they're taught that applied chemistry is a necessary component of the food system. This mindset cultivates dependencies on inputs, instead of working with biological systems to enhance immunity, health, and vitality. It also creates damaging effects on the earth and in our societies, as we see with the recent opiate epidemic. We have lost our imaginations for how to deeply heal ourselves and care for the land that our lives depend on. In medicine and in farming, the entities we are interacting with, viewed through the scientific lens, are inert. A patient is a machine with broken parts that needs to be repaired, who can be fixed as a sole individual. The soil is an inert substance. After the petrochemical inputs have killed the biology that lives in it, we simply replace what we think is needed, because somehow we know better than microbes that have evolved over billions of years. Which brings me to my next point, which is our shared colonial capitalist cosmology, where fabricated hierarchies structure our society, systems of domination that put humans over every other living entity, including the soil and the water. It puts people of European ancestry over all other people, cis hetero men over all other expressions of humanity, one religion over all other worldviews, private property over all other expressions of being on land. This structuring is a necessary part of cultivating the desperation needed for the system to function. This dividing allows exploitation to occur. Both farming and medicine have been structured to value productivity over care, to generate profits rather than vitality and health. This is why you don't feel healed after you visit the doctor, and why people are getting sick from the foods we are eating, and why the climate is becoming more unstable from the ways we are interacting with the earth. Both systems reflect a deep distrust in life's intelligence and the relationships necessary to benefit from it. This distrust is not an accident. It is required to leave us all desperate and dependent on external inputs, which we have been led to believe that we need, but we don't need them. What we need is to immerse ourselves in life's intelligence. And there is no better place to get a close-up look at life's intelligence than by zooming in on our microbes. The most successful living creatures on Earth, in terms of sheer number, adaptability, and longevity, are microbes: bacteria, fungi, archaea, and viruses. It took a virus, SARS-CoV-2, to show us that we can indeed pause and deeply reimagine our future. Totally underrated in the climate discussion, microbes are responsible for most of the world's carbon and nitrogen cycling. Our food system would collapse without them, regardless of what Fritz Haber might say. Haber was the first person to fix nitrogen without the use of microbes. This led to the development of several chemical weapons, as well as nitrogen fertilizer, which has been the mainstay of industrial agriculture and the scourge of coral reefs around the world. Non-biological nitrogen has given humans the escape velocity to sever our connection to the web of life. It is the wound we must repair. The human microbiome, all of the creatures that live on us and in us, is made up of trillions of organisms, some of them vital for our own health, and some of them just along for the ride. Whereas humans have 20,000 protein encoding genes, the same amount as a fruit fly, our microbes contain at least 200 million, and some of them are critical for our health. The gut microbiome, what lives inside of our intestines, sits at the crossroads of vital pathways for neurological, endocrine, and immune development. These organisms train these systems to function optimally. Enzymes from these microbes are able to digest foods that we can't, and the byproducts that they produce can be beneficial for our health or harmful, depending on what we eat and what genes these microbes possess. For example, some microbes can break down plant fibers and create short-chain fatty acids, which have multiple anti-inflammatory health benefits. Our microbiome is formed early in life. As early as 14 weeks in utero, we can see early clusters of bacteria in the folds of developing babies' intestines. These are scanning electron micrographs of a 14-week-old fetus intestines, and those little round shapes you see are early clusters of microbes. So contrary to prior thought, the uterus is not a sterile environment, and babies have their microbiome already starting inside their mother's bodies. These organisms appear to be training the immune system to tolerate the passengers who will live inside us and confer us with incredible and vital health benefits. When we are born through the vagina, we get the biggest inoculation of our microbes from our mother. Breastfeeding then selects for bacteria that create metabolic products that are critical for establishing the immune system's tone and setting up a pattern of immune health. As we grow older, what we feed our gut microbes and what we are exposed to shapes the gut microbiome, which is constantly changing in relationship to the foods we eat and the environment around us. Plant-based diets, like the Mediterranean diet, lead to our microbes creating more short-chain fatty acids, those that counter inflammation. Animal protein-based diets do the opposite, with microbes creating metabolic products that can drive inflammation. Dietary chemicals, such as emulsifiers, can strip the microbiome altogether. So in fact, you are what your microbes eat. But it isn't just diet that impacts how the microbes we carry will help or hinder our health. The biodiversity of the microbiome also matters. Most diseases of inflammation are associated with a microbiome that lacks biodiversity. And what causes the biodiversity to drop is a function of multiple exposures. In fact, it is the exposome, which is the sum of our lifetime exposures, which starts with what our mothers are exposed to. Actually, it starts with what our great-grandmothers are exposed to. It includes everything from how walkable a city is to our lifestyle choices like diet and smoking. It includes how much money we make, how much debt we carry, and what chemicals we may be exposed to. It also includes how stressed we are, our histories, the structures of power we are subjected to, including racism, sexism, ableism, and caste. Our cosmologies and our stories are also part of the exposome, how we understand the world, how safe we perceive it to be, and what our role is in it. We are learning that certain exposomes are highly inflammatory, where racism, debt, chemical exposures, and processed foods all add up to create a potent mix. Here, the immune system is not dysregulated. It is reacting appropriately to a damaging world. Those are exposomes that denude our microbial biodiversity, removing one of the most effective defenses against inflammation. And on the other side of the spectrum, there are healthy exposomes that promote it. When scientists looked at the gut microbiota of different communities around the world, they found that Indigenous people living traditional lifestyles have the most biodiverse guts on the planet. They also do not suffer from the diseases, the modern diseases of inflammation. Their rates of heart disease, diabetes, and cancer are very low. Age-related hypertension, an expected outcome of aging in industrialized societies whose slope starts increasing when children go to school, is non-existent in these cultures. These Indigenous groups possess some ancestral strains of microbes that are excellent at quelling inflammation. These strains actually don't exist in modern industrialized people. Taking a probiotic pill to inoculate ourselves won't work because everything around us will kill them. They require a certain environment to thrive, and that is not one that contains PFAS, deforestation, and rampant white supremacy. When it comes to these superorganisms, we have lost touch with these ancestors. And as you can see, this graph shows that the least biodiverse gut that they studied was the US urban dweller. Indigenous people are not only tending the most biodiversity inside their bodies, They are also tending most of the Earth's entire biodiversity outside their bodies. They are masters at harmonizing ecological systems. This isn't because they have some special sauce. We all come from indigenous tribes somewhere back in our lineage, before Hinduism, before Christianity, and before these systems developed that would seek to concentrate power in fewer and fewer hands. Their mastery is because of their worldview, their cosmology that centers relationship and care. The cosmology that has structured this society is characterized by systems of domination, and the outcome is damage and inflammation. We cannot hope to tweak one little area and think we can gain ground in transforming outcomes. We must wholly take on the entire world view, which leads to the next question. As we face the challenges in the 21st century, we have to get real with ourselves. A softer, gentler colonialism or a fuzzier, greener capitalism cannot give us the outcomes we need to secure the health of future generations. Having Black and Brown leadership in systems that are inherently structured to oppress people of color will not adequately bring about the kinds of transformation we need in the exposome to get better health. What we need is another mindset. And lucky for you, I spent the last year detailing what that looks like in this book. I had the opportunity to write with my friend and comrade, the incomparable genius of Raj Patel. It comes out in August this year, and I look forward to sharing the incredible teachings we have gathered from our Indigenous friends, farmers, activists, and scholars from around the world. We write about several kinds of deep medicine to address the challenges we face. And one of the most important, because it reframes how we care, is agroecology. Because in agroecology, there is a centering of care that is centering not on the self or the individual. Care of the self actually occurs by way of caring for the other, by tending the soil and the relationships around it, by giving it what it needs to thrive. The plants we grow in it will thrive, and we will thrive as an outcome. To undo the damaging mindset that got us here, we must start with repairing broken relationships with each other and with the land. We must abolish damaging practices. Just as our bodies hold trauma and remember, impacting our immune systems for generations, the land holds trauma and remembers. We must start our healing of the soil simultaneously with our healing of relationships. What do some of those best practices look like? Well, for the soil, we know it's maximizing soil microbiology. So instead of playing whack-a-mole with every chemical that comes to market that is damaging soil, the soil life, the soil web of life, we need to wholesale abolish anything that damages this microbiology because our life and our health is dependent on it. At the same time, we need to maximize giving land back to Indigenous people and entering the proper relationship. We need to liberate the land from private property perspectives and look at new ways and new models of being together as settlers on stolen land. For the soil, we need to minimize soil disturbance, so practicing low-till or no-till farming to interrupt ripping apart the complex mycelial biology that's happening there. On the social plane, we have to minimize racist exclusion and oppression, dismantling those systems that require landowners in California to be predominantly white and land workers to be predominantly people of color. For the soil, we increase mass and quality of plant and animal biology. In our social systems, we increase cooperative ownership, changing our structures of labor. In the plant and soil world, we ensure that there's continuous living plant coverage on our ground to keep the soil wet and healthy. And in our culture, we need continuous care for each other. In order for this work to be possible, we must refuse to participate in systems that require constant growth, ones that demand profitability. We must start building systems that allow for this kind of circular flow of wealth and health between our planet, our societies, and all living creatures. This schematic I found useful in the imagining. It's from Kate Raworth's book, Donut Economics. So how do we do this? Well, we organize. we start creating stronger ties in our communities to force the agenda. A shout out to the farmers in India who are showing us how power will cave to massive organizing. Farmers control the food system. Ultimately, none of us can live without those who grow the food. That's a tremendous leveraging point. The road ahead is not easy nor simple, but it is possible with perseverance. And it is possible with community. The story of the doctor who becomes a farmer is not the solution to our problems. No individual story is, and it never can be. It is our collective work together that will get us to where we need to be to ensure a livable and viable planet for our great-grandchildren. I look forward to building more ties with you in our farming community, as the doctor-turned-farmer who will be with you alongside with my hands in the dirt, looking under a microscope at the soil, learning with you in this time of great reckoning and great turning. And my learning and unlearning is continuing here in Ramaytush territory, where I was born, where my grandfather died, and where my sons arrived on planet Earth. Together with Jonathan Cardero and Greg Castro, we are engaging the Peninsula Open Space Trust in hopes to move 38 acres of farmland back into Ramaytush hands so that they can start the healing. This would be their first land holding in their traditional homeland since the genocide. It is an honor to work with them to advance their ancestral responsibilities, to continue their culture, to take care of the earth, and to take care of all people living here. By correcting our relationships and entering this work as farmers on Indigenous land, we start in the right manner. The food grown here will be medicine. This project is a joining together of several entities. The Ramaytush Association of Ramaytush with Top Leaf Farms, our urban, rural, agroecological farming business I founded with my husband, farmer Benjamin Farr. We are working with Lunavase Farm, run by Rupa Marya, and Sophia Pablo Hushino, who currently operate a CSA supporting local BIPOC farmers. And the Deep Medicine Circle, an entity we are creating to do this work of healing, of healing the wounds of colonialism through food, medicine, story, and learning. The Farming is Medicine project starts with land rematriation, back into the hands of the original people from whom it was stolen so that the healing may start. We will be employing BIPOC farmers as ecological stewards, independent of how much they produce, reframing their work to being primarily to care for the soil and the water. We will be growing a diverse array of crops using agroecological methods with long-range production cycles to support restoring the soil, building up water, and revitalizing the wild edges. The healthy food that we create is then liberated from the market economy and will go to area food hubs. We are partnering with the American Indian Cultural District up in San Francisco and UCSF's Food Pharmacy, and exploring a partnership with the Tenderloin Neighborhood Development Corporation. TNDC, who has enlisted Top Leaf to create several rooftop farms on their new affordable housing in San Francisco. They are the only nonprofit housing developer in the city. They are making a storefront for their members to get food without the exchange of money. That work is supported through the sugary drinks tax. These food hubs will give away the food to those who need it the most, those whose exposomes are toxic from the creation of poverty and racism. Our plan also includes creek restoration for support for bringing the salmon back, and education of urban youth to form an urban-rural corridor that links farms we are building on rooftops in the urban environment with this rural project. Our goal is to teach the next generation of farmers how to grow food at multiple scales in correct relationship while simultaneously supporting a thriving surrounding ecology. And we will watch the outcomes to share the healing with our community and the data with our local policymakers. So we will be engaging with storytelling as medicine, bringing the stories back to the land. We will be evaluating farmer happiness, stress, and health. We will be watching the soil for how it changes under these practices, and watching the water for how it recuperates, bringing back the salmon, as well as evaluating dietary pattern changes in the people who receive the food. We believe the food system can be transformed by scaling these kinds of small projects, not in size, but by staying small and implementing new economic models that prioritize care of the earth, of the people, of the salmon, of the water. We would love to see 100 such small farms go up all over Ohlone territory, starting with land rematriation. Learning from COVID, which spread around the entire planet in 1 year, we can scale this like a virus. The next phase of our work together with our Ramatish friends includes fundraising for them to purchase a 640-acre site across the street from this 38-acre farm. This would be the site of their homecoming. We are developing a shared vision that includes land management through agroforestry, maintaining wildlife corridors, the creation of a village, a place for BIPOC people to heal their wounded severance from land, an agroecological center to participate in the global dialogue around land-based and seed-based pedagogies, and a healing center to decolonize food and medicine. I never realized that my life would take me down this amazing road, and I am so grateful for the compass in my chest that guides me. Apparently, stewarding these clinics into being is part of my work. I was honored to be invited to do this in Lakota, Dakota, Nakota territory after the DAPL camp came down at Standing Rock. That work is well underway with the leadership of tribal health workers Tasha Peltier and Elena Eagleshield at the helm. This clinic is entering a novel partnership with a tribally owned wind farm. It will be the first wind-funded free clinic to decolonize medicine in this land, an innovative example of what we can do if we reimagine our systems to serve us instead of injure us. In order to transform our world, in order for health to be possible for all beings, we must get radical. We must start at the roots. And farming is a great way to do that because our food and how we grow, it ends up becoming part of who we are. We must start with rematriating the land that was stolen and enter proper relationship with Indigenous people and learn to support them furthering their cultural agendas, which deeply center around care. We must reintegrate farming back into the web of life, learning from life's intelligence and accepting the humility that comes with it. We must liberate farmers from the market economy, the farmers and the food. We must value care and thriving over production. We must dismantle white supremacy in food systems and in all systems. That means if you hear doctors talking about the connection between the soil and gut microbiome with one breath, and then telling you that COVID is something you don't have to worry about and wear a mask in the other breath, when COVID is killing Black and brown people disproportionately, you have to look critically at that and start asking some questions. We need everyone to get involved with dismantling that toxic system. We must feed all the people with fossil fuel-free food. It is time to rid the food industry of these inputs. They're killing the planet, they're killing the soil, and it's killing the people. We must create a declaration of rights of the soil, the water, and the air. And I know several groups who are imagining this and furthering this work, and we should support it. And we must center soil health as human health, because our health is vitally dependent on the microbes that are in the soil. That their flourishing is our flourishing. And anything that harms that flourishing in the soil must be abolished. It is no longer time to be playing whack-a-mole with every chemical, taking 10 years to ban one after the other when 30,000 hit the market every few years. We don't have time for that anymore. We must center the health and vitality of our ecosystems. And we must reframe farmers and farm workers as truly the stewards of our health. Because I can prescribe insulin, but I can't stop the diabetes from coming because the diabetes is being caused by these systems of inflammation. Farmers and farm workers and how they steward the land are vitally critical towards stemming this tide of inflammation. And that I will leave you with this great quote by Cesar Chavez. To make a great dream come true, the first requirement is a great capacity to dream. And the second is persistence. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rupa. That was fantastic. Oh my God. It's really inspiring. So we're going to ask folks for questions. If you want to drop some questions into the chat, and we'll get them to you. But I just had a few ones to start off with. I just started following you on Twitter, and it's like I don't know how you do it. You're constantly putting stuff out. I read somewhere that you get up at 3 a.m. to write your book, and then you go to work, and you've got kids, and you've got a life, and you've got a band. And it took me 3 years to write a book. It's just like 3 years longer than it was supposed to take me. How do you make it happen all? I mean, I'm just amazed by the quantity and quality of what you're able to do.
Well, first of all, I don't do it all at the same time. And second of all, I have an amazing husband and partner and grandmother of Ben's family. So we have amazing family. We have amazing community and incredible friends. So Raj, writing this book with Raj has been one of the greatest gifts of my life, to be able to concentrate on articulating these thoughts from so many years into a cohesive form. And it definitely, was the blood, sweat, and tears of both of us working together. So none of these things happen at the same time. This last year has been largely trying to, get through the pandemic as a hospital medicine doctor and survive the wildfires and write the book.
Great. So it takes a village, truly. So the next I just want to do moderator's privilege, and I'll ask you a couple more questions that are coming coming from the audience, and I'm being told that people are giving standing ovations and lots of applause, so it's wonderful. The question I had is, you talk about how to care of yourself, or care of the self is through care of others. And to me, that is just incredibly timely. My wife and I have our conversations about our frustration about the lack of sense of community in this country, how people won't wear masks to take care of others. And a friend of mine just passed away, unfortunately, and he was, what I hear is he was thinking about this book by a gentleman called Merlin Sheldrake, who writes about fungi, and talks about how it no longer makes sense to talk about individuals anymore, but instead to really be talking about relationships. And I just want to get your reflections on that.
Absolutely. I'm sorry to hear about your friend. There's so much mourning that we have to do, I feel, collectively. But yes, one of the thoughts in our book is that we are not singular organisms, that our sense of identity must be made plural. Because if I can't even grow a healthy immune system without the millions of microbes inside my gut, well, what am I? And what is other? And so there have been these false dichotomies that have been created, again, as a part of this colonial cosmology that are just not true, and they're also damaging. So I agree, and the fungi can teach us so much about that. They are so deeply involved in the movement of resources and the evolution of the cycling of life and death. And so I believe that our consciousness must evolve into one that is much more relationship based, and that's where Indigenous communities around the world are really the ones we should be following, that we should learn to lead through following them, because these solutions will not come from white spaces. They will not come from those people and systems that have damaged the earth and the relationships. They will come from these sides and these margins where these cosmologies have persisted for thousands, hundreds of thousands of years. And so how do we enter proper relationship with those folks and encourage those stories to come back and take over, and encourage our own alignment with those understandings? So yes, I completely agree.
Thank you. So here's a question from our audience. How can farmers start to move away from a profit system?
I think that that is a great question. I think it depends on where you are and what kind of farming you're willing to do. I think we need to lobby the state of California right now, when we have some funding and the thoughts of changing or greening our world, our system are very active. We need to lobby the state of California to reframe all of our farmers as stewards of our land and soil, and they should be paid very well for that work. just as doctors are paid very well for the work of stewarding the health of our communities, we need to uplift farmers as the stewards of our health, and they should be paid that way. With great benefits and great retirement and all that, all that doctors get. And so I feel like starting to lobby hard and organize hard collectively is one way. And then starting to look at small little ways you can start this work in your own community. So for us in the Bay Area, that means farming small and farming in a way where we can get funding from things like the sugary drinks taxes. There's funding for health that we can then use to farm and create healthy food for people who need it. So there's ways of getting innovative cities. I think San Francisco has not met any of its climate goals with regards to food justice. So there's an opportunity to start creating plans and presenting them to cities and governments who have plenty of money to fund this work. It's also important to start looking at policies like an oil severance tax, which could be used to fund this kind of radical shift in our food system. So there are taxes that don't exist here on the industries that are making us sick, such as the fossil fuel industry, such as the pesticides. So those we can start developing and galvanizing public support for these kinds of measures.
Great, thank you. So there's a couple questions that would address kind of your medical experience, and I think one of them I wanted to push forward was, can you suggest questions that we can ask our physicians and pediatricians to begin this conversation?
Which conversation?
I would assume that's a great question.
So I would engage. I guess if you're looking at food as health, asking doctors and pediatricians their thoughts and their training and getting a sense from your practitioner, like how involved they are in these discussions. Asking your doctors, have they been involved in work in decolonizing medicine? Have they thought of those approaches? Have they thought about systems that can help boost immunity? I feel like doctors are quite responsive when they start hearing the same things from patients. Like they're not, for example, with the whole push on medicinal cannabis products, that came from our patients. Most of us have been educated by our patients. It's because our patients came in using these things that people started looking more seriously at them. So I think that pushing these ideas with our doctors is critical. But on a deeper policy level, I think that this sort of work needs to start happening in medical school. So we need to start training our doctors and nurses through a decolonizing perspective in healthcare, where we don't strip patients of their autonomy and choice and turn them into childlike machines, that we actually honor and understand the whole cosmology that people are bringing to a healthcare encounter and why they're getting sick, and then understanding how to support that in the ways that make sense for that person and their culture and their perspectives. So for me, ideally, I would start having medical school on a farm. And if we get, if we start working on this land with our Ramatish friends, one of the first things is going to be to bring down the Do No Harm Coalition medical students and nurses onto the land and get their hands in the dirt and start talking about, the radical work of feeding people as a healthcare intervention.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, I think what you're getting at is really a question of who owns science and, who controls knowledge. And it's something we've been talking about at EcoFarm for a long time. But one other question here that I wanted to get at from the audience is, this person said, rematriation is a return to a spiritual way of life. Is that what you mean when you say rematriating the land?
That's a really good question, because several different people have several different definitions, and they're all people have different meanings for this. My good friend Karina Gould, a Ohlone matriarch, who will be speaking with myself, Ben, and Darcy Hook, a lawyer, at our workshop that comes right after this. We will be talking about the mechanics on how to rematriate land, what that looks like. So for me, it means giving land back to Indigenous people, putting that land back in their hands until the point where we can abolish systems of private property altogether, but giving them back the land and the authority over their ancestral lands. For and that's like a primary space, a primary sense of what that means, giving the land back. For others, it means reestablishing women's places of authority on land. And in many of the indigenous cultures here were matriarchal cultures, and women had deep places of authority of how land was used, how resources were allocated, and how seeds and water and resources were shared in community. So rematriation means bringing back that matriarchal, matrilineal wisdom and perspectives. Other folks, such as my good friend Rowan White, seed saver, believes that rematriation is making the space again for the Mother Earth in our lives and in our understandings. And so really opening that space in ourselves to honor and be in deep relationship with that mother. So it has many meanings, but all of them start with giving the land back.
Okay. Along the same lines, along the kind of going back to kind of medical lines, we have a question that asks, the person is curious if you could explain the slide that showed the body and the heart being the place where autoimmune disease is housed.
So a lot of autoimmune disease we are now understanding as this dysregulation of the immune system. Some of that immune programming that happens in the fetus and in early life trains our immune cells either to be highly reactive in one way or highly reactive in another. For example, children who grow up on Amish farms don't have the levels of hay fever, asthma, and allergy that children who grow up on Hutterite farms, which are similarly cloistered communities, but the Hutterite farmers use industrial machines, and they don't farm with hand tools the way the Amish do. There's something about the dust from the houses of the Amish farmers that confers an immunity balance that doesn't let those kids develop asthma. It's protective. Whereas the dust in the houses of the Hutterite farmers, who are also small farmers, but they farm with machines and not with their hands in the dirt, that dust doesn't confer that benefit. And that balancing of immunity is determined not just by the soil microbes and the microbes around us, but the microbes that are in our gut. And so autoimmune disease is another disease where that balance is tipped another way. So that is as easy as I can explain it for the purposes of right now. But if anyone is interested in looking, there are great papers online, especially in the Nature series around autoimmunity and the gut microbiome.
Great, thank you. One last question for you, and that's this person says she's meditating, or he or she is meditating on this issue while homeschooling my young children. I can't help but wonder what we are teaching our children in public schools. Are you working with anyone or know of any organizations reforming the public school system to create education that is more in alignment with this worldview in which we must move towards?
Unfortunately, no, and that's why my children are not in school. So we are homeschooling our children too. We wanted to give our children a decolonizing education that is farm-based and based in the things that we value and I think are important. It means that my husband and I make less money, but we are, committed to seeing our children through this critical period of their developing. I have a 2-year-old and a 7-year-old. It is hard work, especially during COVID. Our ideal scenario is that we are more potted up with families, but because of my work as a doctor in a hospital, that's been very challenging. And so as the pandemic eases, we hope to, form as much as we can collective pods to educate our children.
Great. I think we can squeeze in one more question. And after attending the memorials at EcoFarm for a number of years, it seems that organic farmers are not living as long as the average person. Is this just bad statistics? Is this just, anecdotal, or do you see anything that's any rationale for that?
I have not seen anything off of that. I can imagine being an organic farmer in a really intense industrial farming, pro-conventional farming system is a very stressful experience. But I can't say what that is about. I'm sorry.
It's okay. So I think we have a ton of other questions, but we're running out of time. I just wanted to thank you so much for being here with us. I know that you've been coming to EcoFarm for a long time, and I've been told by staff that they would see your kids, biking around. So I'm thrilled that we're able to bring you on as a keynote speaker, and it's been a fantastic talk. So I hope we get to spend more time together, Rupa.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you.